Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast chat. And today we're going to talk a little bit about squats. Now, I made a video the other day, of course, explaining that front squats do not work the quads any more than back squats. And anyone arguing with that, I'm sorry, you're ridiculous. The evidence is pretty solid in the other direction. There's no biomechanical reason, there's no logic or reason to support any argument that front squats work quads anymore unless you change the range of motion and your stance based upon it. But if the stance and the depth are the same, quad growth is identical whether you do a front or a back squat. And this is not me saying it. This is what all the leading experts in physiology and biomechanics say. Okay, this is not even a point of contention. Like, the layman shouldn't even be debating this. If you want to go argue with another PhD, but you're probably going to lose based on the data. But we come over to the whole idea with quad weakness on squats. And this is something I've made videos on. I actually have videos that will come out in the future that have already been made on this, where I've said that I generally do not see quad weaknesses in the squat for sub 500 pound squatters, right? And I get squatters up to 500 pounds without worrying about their quads. It doesn't mean their quads don't grow. Just like we're going to discuss with the squat, no one's saying the quads don't grow from squatting. It's just that developing them maximally probably doesn't matter until we're chasing those last few percentages on a squat. And to get to a 500 squat or a 450 squat, you really shouldn't need to think about your quads, for most men, right? I'm not saying you wouldn't benefit maybe from a little bit, but it's going to be a misallocation of your resources if you're trying to get to a 500 squat as quickly as possible. So again, because it's just not as important. But when you start looking at a lot of the data that's out there, and multiple studies show this, it turns out that when full squats are studied, because again, this is what we're usually talking about, a deep squat, because ironically, some of these other muscles get used less. And all these people will say, oh, well, deep squats is the best way to build the quads. I don't know, it's negligible. Meaning certain parts of the quads get worked a little more when you go really deep, like the lower half, the lower third, right? The VMO and things can get worked a little bit more when we go deep. But when we start looking at deeper squats, and again, meaning below parallel, most of the research shows that when they measure the hypertrophy plotted over time, we're not just looking at muscle activation, we're looking at actual muscle growth, like with muscle MRIs, right? To where we're seeing how much muscle is growth in test subjects. We usually see more growth in the adductors and the glutes. Okay? Not saying the quads don't grow. I'm not saying that a lot of people can't build massive quad squatting. I can, but it's a genetic strong point for me. My quads would be big if I did nothing but squatting. My quads would be big if I did nothing but back squatting, but I do other stuff for them. But box squatting makes my quads grow. But here's the thing. I already had quads. I had big quads before I started lifting. It's a genetic strong point. I had little tiny stick arms when I first started lifting. And I had big quads and big calves. And I had a 225 squat. The first day I got in the gym, someone taught me how to squat. We got me under the barbell. It was easy. And we just kept adding weight. I ended up grinding out a 2-plate squat. I had quads already, though. So, for me, it's different. I have long torso, short femurs. For people with a different structure, your quads may not get massive, and they certainly won't get maximally developed from doing any form of squat. It doesn't matter if it's a back squat or a front squat. Again, we're not saying they won't grow. We're not saying you can't add inches to your quads. It's just that when we start looking at the growth rates, the quads are not the muscles that grow fastest. And again, it's not saying they're not growing a lot, because they do. When you look at these studies, the quads grow substantially. It's just that when we start looking at what else grows, the adductors and the glutes get more growth, like a larger percentage of change in size from their starting point. So what I'm suggesting here is that usually when we're squatting, quads are just kind of along for the ride. And I'm not saying you should completely ignore them forever, but early on in your training, they're just not that big of a deal. They'll grow from it, but your squats themselves, if you wanted to actually do supplemental work, your squats themselves will grow more from training the muscles that are going to be the most important primary movers. And again, quads matter just slightly less than the adductors and the glutes do. Putting more effort into those posterior chain, it's going to do more for you. Now, also what people forget, they'll start talking about, oh, squats for leg development. No, not really. It'll work the quads and the adductors, but your hamstrings don't grow. When we look at squat-only programs and that the hypertrophy is studied, hamstrings grow almost none. Okay, they're a dynamic stabilizer in the squat. They can affect your squat. And in fact, working on your hamstrings can do certain things to help you get more power out of the bottom of a squat and add more stability. But your hamstrings do not get stimulated enough to grow very much. And again, I'm not saying it's zero, but when we compare it to all the other muscles of the lower body, the hamstrings grow the least from squats. Actually, calves even grow more from squats than hamstrings do. Again, I think that shocks a lot of people when they hear that. Like, what? Yeah. Actually, squats are actually a pretty good calf exercise. Based upon all the data we have, they're actually pretty good. They're better calf than they are a hamstring exercise. And this applies to any type of squat. I've seen people, I've got friends and people I know who are like, oh yeah, I like Bulgarian split squats. They light my hamstrings up. Really? Biomechanically, they shouldn't. If your hamstrings are growing from split squats or lunges, you have really weak, tiny ass hamstrings. You should probably be doing more hamstring work. In fact, if you even feel them on that. But again, you look at the differences in my strength stuff. My hamstrings are big, and I train them hard with really big weights. And people who follow my stuff realize that. I don't just come in and play with 200 pounds for reps on good mornings, a little lightweight like that. Okay, I don't play around. My hamstring work is heavy. So what you'll find, though, is that the squats, they don't really work hamstrings. So when you start looking closely at the squat and what grows, adductors and glutes. And I would suggest to a lot of people that accordingly, if you want your quads to grow a little bit faster just from your squatting, rather than worry about, hey, can I change and make my squat more quad dominant? Because this is, again, Olympic style squats is what they looked at in studies. They very rarely study power squats. That the quads still grow slower than the others. But if you get the other two stronger, the quads will come along for the ride. In other words, if you spend some extra time working on adductors and glutes, and that can be done with a lot of movements, Romanian deadlifts, direct glute work, glute bridges, reverse hypers, good mornings, even some single leg exercises. But if you work more on those areas, and again, meaning more posterior chain work, your squats will go up quicker anyways, and therefore the tension will increase on your quads. Your quads will be along for the ride. They'll probably grow faster as a result of doing that. And that's generally been my approach. I do some direct quad work because it does help. But I do put more effort into posterior chain, and accordingly, I still have massive quads. Now, again, I'm not always the best example to use because it's a genetic strong point for me. Just like you wouldn't take some guy who has amazing arm genetics and use his arm routine, because it may not work for everyone else. He's just that gifted. But I do see the same thing in a lot of my clients and athletes. I see similar things, that their quads end up growing just from getting them stronger on squatting, but we'll focus on the other muscles more to get the squat up more quickly. Right? I think good mornings are probably the single best accessory you could do for squats. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.